those receivers collect the radio signals coming out of the aircraft, and from that radio signal, there's information about the aircraft's position, speed, heading, altitude, things like that.
Welcome to another episode of the Mapscaping podcast. My name is Daniel, and this is a podcast for the mapping community. Today I'm talking to Ian from Flightradar 24, and Flightradar 24 tracks airplanes in real time. It's an interesting story, and I really hope you enjoy the interview. Hi Ian, thank you so much for taking the time to talk to me today. And what we're going to be talking about is Flightradar 24. Maybe you could tell us a little bit about the history of this website.
Absolutely. Thank you so very much for having me. It's a pleasure to be here, and I'm glad we could sit down and chat. So Flightradar 24 started in 2006, 2007 as a side project, not even a side project, just as a small project within what was then our co-founders' flight and travel reservation booking service. Think, along the lines of, Kayak or something like that, where you're pulling in bookings from multiple sources to provide price comparison. And they were looking for a way to bring traffic to that site. And so what they did is they set up a couple ADS-B receiver antennas in Stockholm, Sweden, where they were based. And from there, they started to generate a map with traffic on it, air traffic, what was around Stockholm. And that little widget or embed that was on the price comparison site started to see more and more and more traffic, and eventually started to see more traffic than the price comparison site. So doing what any good business folk would do, they decided that perhaps there was an opportunity here to create a full-fledged service based on the ADS-B receivers and displaying that information on the map. And that is how Flightradar 24 was born.
And I realize now, after hearing you tell that story, that I made a bit of a critical mistake right at the start there. I introduced Flightradar as a website, but it's not a website at all. I mean, it has a website, of course. We can go there and we can log on and we can see what's happening. We can see the flights from all over the world moving around. But what it actually is a network of receivers. And you mentioned a little bit about the kind of data that's been sent back and forth, but maybe we could dive a little bit into that network. How does it work?
Sure. So the network that we have right now grew from just a few receivers in the Stockholm area to over 20,000 terrestrial-based ADS-B receivers around the world now, and so it's grown quite handedly over the past dozen or so years, and those receivers collect the radio signals coming out of the aircraft, and from that radio signal, there's information about the aircraft's position, speed, heading, altitude, things like that. And then we use that information that's collected by our receivers as a way of plotting everything onto a map and combining that with other information that comes from third-party sources or our own databases to provide a global picture of air travel.
And this network, it's crowdsourced largely, isn't it?
Yeah, so the way that we source the data is twofold. The first is that we have our own receiver kits that we send out to qualified hosts around the world. And when I say qualified hosts, I mean folks who are in a very good geographic position, but also have the ability to set up the antenna in a good location such that coverage is good near an airport or on top of a mountain or something like that, where the coverage of that specific receiver is going to be very beneficial. The other method that we use is we provide a software package for users who want to develop their own receiver, and what we suggest is using a Raspberry Pi, because we've developed a rather simplified method of getting the image onto the Raspberry Pi, and it's from there it's nearly plug and play.
Okay, so we've got this huge network. We've got 20,000 receivers, possibly more, out there in the world creating this network. And each of these receivers is receiving data from the aircrafts that are moving around the world, and they're receiving altitude and call sign maybe and position. And I think in the pre-interview you said something about, depending on what type of data is being sent, they could also be sending or receiving, some weather information. So we've got this huge network, and we've got this amazing live tracking of these aircrafts on a map. What are we doing with this data? What's the use case for this?
Sure. So the use case is dependent on who the user is. We can segment the use case into a variety of kind of channels, and the first is, I think the most personally important, is someone who wants to know where a specific plane is because they have someone important to their lives on board. If grandma's coming to visit, you want to know exactly when she's going to get there so that you can get to the airport in time to pick her up, or you want to know if she's going to be delayed. Your kids are traveling and you want peace of mind. You just know where they are, things like that. If you are soon to be on board an aircraft, you can know where it's coming from and whether or not it's going to be delayed, which is thoroughly important if you're trying to decide on whether or not to have another drink at the bar at the airport. So I mean, it can be that's one of the generally important kind of things that a lot of people use our service for. The other is the other kind of general retail use is plane spotters, or folks who are just interested in the aircraft themselves, whether it's a special type of aircraft that they really like, or it's a special livery, so that there's special painting on that particular aircraft and they just want to be able to see it in person, or get a picture of it or something like that. That's a big chunk of our users as well.
That's really interesting. Like I never actually knew that there were plane spotters. Obviously, I'd heard of train spotters before, but that was mainly because of the movie Train Spotting. But plane spotters, that's a little bit new for me. There must be some kind of more sort of business-driven use case for this kind of data, I'm thinking, because it sounds like a pretty amazing network that you've collected. And when you log on to Flightradar 24 or go to the website, it's pretty impressive to see all these planes moving around the world. And I'm assuming if they're all sort of sending out real-time information saying, I am here, my name is, I'm traveling at this direction, and maybe a little bit about at this altitude perhaps, and about the weather in some cases, that must build an amazing database over time.
Absolutely. The main kind of enterprise use case is certainly not in knowing where a single flight is, but knowing where a group of flights are, or a group of aircraft, or even a global data set of aviation, especially if you're working on a larger project that benefits from having a large amount of data available. Having a data set that spans years and global air traffic really kind of lends itself to allowing those users to make business decisions based on the data that we've collected. So, for example, airlines or airports looking at historical patterns of usage of particular runways, perhaps, or particular aircraft types. If an airline is interested in finding out how their fleet or subfleet is doing on a particular set of KPIs, then we're able to provide that information so that they can balance their business decisions based on historical data. And what we see is the ability of the ability of that large data set to influence some really important business decisions that airlines, airports, and even airframers are undertaking.
I come from the GIS, the Geographical Information Systems or Science world, and the Geospatial world, and we're all about mapping. We're all about using different data layers, I guess, to make decisions. And I guess one of the classic use cases for this for GIS, for the system of layering geographic data, would be show me the best place for something. Could you imagine this data being used in that kind of analysis? Like, where's the best place to put an airline? An airport.
I would think that there might be certainly some valuable insight that you could glean from this particular data as far as where to site a future airport, possibly based on current flight patterns or things like that, areas that are lacking kind of the congestion that would influence operations at a particular airport. So you don't want to necessarily add to the congestion in airspace. I mean, if you look at a great example of extremely congested airspace is New York City, or the area around New York City. You have three of the world's busiest airports within 5 miles of each other: Newark, LaGuardia, and JFK. And so you wouldn't want to put another airport near there. And so using kind of the flight path data that we were able to generate, you could say, okay, that would be a terrible place to put an airport, but what about over here? So yeah, I mean, that's certainly something that I could see the data being useful for.
When you dive into this database that you're collecting, can you see any trends or patterns over time? Is there anything that stands out?
Yeah, I mean, if you're looking at putting things onto the map, one of the most striking things, once you know what you're looking for, I think is viewing the jet stream, because all of the transatlantic aircraft that are headed from North America to Europe are going to take advantage of the jet stream. When the wind is good, they'll take that tailwind, and they'll avoid the jet stream, on the reverse trip. So flying from Europe to North America, they'll either go north of the jet stream or south of the jet stream, depending on where their final destination is. And so what you end up seeing is over time, really a visualization of the jet stream as a function of air travel. So that's one of the neat things that you can see where the planes are is going to be, generally where the jet stream is. So that's one of the neat little visual patterns that you can pick up.
I could imagine that things like border conflicts or conflict zones in general, that they must change the way people travel, change the way airplanes fly, change the paths that they fly in. Is that kind of thing, is it visible in this data?
Absolutely. Absolutely. Yeah. And the I would say the most striking example of kind of conflict zone avoidance at the moment is the most recent change in the India, Pakistan, Afghanistan corridor, where a recent kind of increase in tensions between India and Pakistan Pakistan closed its airspace. And so flights that would normally fly to Southeast Asia from Europe and transit Afghanistan, Pakistan, and India are now flying around. So Iran and then through Oman airspace into India. So you see kind of this, it's almost like somebody stepped on the planes to push them south. So you see kind of a levering action where the routes are moving south. Over the past few years, the most striking example would probably be Eastern Ukraine, where you see very few flights there, but flights immediately along the border in Russia, along the eastern border of Ukraine, in Russia, and then as well as the western half of Ukraine. Syria is another one where there aren't a lot of, there's not a lot of traffic and not a lot of airlines willing to fly over Syria or allowed to, for that matter. And then the reopening of Iraqi airspace to commercial traffic after a good number of years, I believe in 2017, shifted things back from Iran had become a very heavily trafficked corridor, and now that the Iraqi airspace is open, you see a thinning there. So you can see kind of a new 2-lane highway open up as flights traverse north and south.
When you talk about this, it seems really obvious. I mean, of course, planes would deviate and take another flight path, to avoid these zones. That makes perfect sense. But it's not something you experience or think too much about as a passenger. You just sit on the plane and assume you're going to end up, at the final destination unharmed.
Yeah, well, of course. And the one of the things that I think is very interesting, that, and like you said, you don't really think about it unless you're interested in it, or if something happens and things like that, is that there are so many flight paths around certain either conflict zones, or you're deviating around weather, or things like that, and you see these holes open up around thunderstorms, or around areas that you don't want to be flying over, and things like that, and then they become patterns that you're always looking for, where if you're on our site and you see a kind of, there's no planes in a particular area, you go, oh, I wonder if there's a storm there, and then you can turn on a weather layer and say, yes, there's in fact a thunderstorm there, and flights are going around.
That brings me actually to another question. We talked earlier about that you integrate this flight data, flight paths, with other kinds of data. So weather is one of those data sets. Do you use any other kind of data sets?
Yeah. So the information that comes from the aircraft is just about that particular craft, and is just the location data and associated kind of data points of speed, heading, and things like that. But to provide a really useful service, what we need to do is tell folks what that aircraft is, and whose aircraft it is, and where it's going, where it's coming from. So all of that information comes from either our own database of aircraft and airports and things like that, or third-party databases that provide the scheduling information and associated information as far as that goes, so that you can combine that information with the information of where the aircraft is to provide a more holistic picture.
Absolutely. It sounds like a good approach, and it sounds like a useful thing to be doing, combining data, especially of those data types. When you look out into the future, if we look 5 years out for Flightradar, where do you see the service? Where do you see the network as well?
I think the big thing is our focus has been for the last number of years, and continues to be, global coverage, and tracking every flight that we can possibly track. And so over the next 5 years, and even before then, our focus is expanding the terrestrial network as much as we can, especially improving upon our receivers and the network, both in terms of geographic scope, but also in terms of technical ability, things that we're doing to improve radio reception and transmission speeds and things of that nature, so that the technical aspects of the network are even bigger. But I think the big leap is certainly going to be the inclusion of satellite data and external data sources that allow us to take advantage of new technologies that are able to host receivers, especially the explosion of space technologies and nanosatellites and things of that nature that allow us to more easily and inexpensively partner with a variety of organizations that are moving in that direction.
Could you imagine that a satellite could actually replace the terrestrial network at some stage? Could you track everything by satellite?
You could, but the terrestrial network, I think, really maintains is the heart of what we do, and it'll remain so for a very long time. Not the least of which is the importance of having multiple sources, especially for when you're collecting radio signals and things of that nature. We need to have the ability to collect from multiple sources. But one of the things that the terrestrial network offers that the satellite network doesn't offer at this point is multilateration. And so the ability to use those fixed position receivers to determine the position of aircraft that aren't necessarily sending out the position information, but just a radio signal that tells us that I'm an aircraft. And then we have to calculate the rest of that information based on the time difference of arrival of those signals. So the ability to have an in-position terrestrial network really, really helps us in that regard. But it also provides a checksum of sorts on the ADS-B data coming either from the terrestrial network or from a space network, in the ability to use multilateration as sort of a tool to create a checksum to understand the ADS-B data a little bit better.
So, Ian, we're slowly but surely coming to the end of our time together, but before I let you go, I've just got a couple more questions. And the first one, we've talked a lot about data, so I was wondering, can you put some numbers around how much data you're collecting? Like, how many signals are you receiving a day, a week, a month, that kind of thing, so we could get a little bit more of a nuanced picture of the size of this network?
Sure. So the I guess funny is an interesting word, but I'll go with funny because I got a good chuckle out of it. There's not a lot of data coming in because the data is designed to be so small. I mean, when we're talking about data, it's a lot, but a daily volume is about 400 gigabytes. Which when I first started, I thought that surely there's terabytes of data coming in. There's got to be so much. But when you dig into it, the radio signals are designed to be, they're designed to be economical. The signals are designed to be small as far as the amount of data that they're sending. So the daily volume inbound to all of our receivers is about 400 gigabytes. Obviously, that number grows when you start including, throughput and things like that and processing. But that kind of is a basic overview of the data coming in.
Yeah, I guess for a global network of this scale, it's not a great deal of data, because I'm thinking that they don't just stop receiving. It's not like they start from 8 o'clock in the morning and stop at 4 o'clock. It's 24 hours a day, 7 days a week kind of thing. But so that's really interesting. Okay, the next question is, let's say I'm all in, which I am. I love what you're doing. It's a great idea, and it's obviously working. It's providing a useful service for lots and lots of people. But let's say I would like to be a part of this. How would I go about being a part of the network and setting up my own receiver? And would that in turn give me access to this data?
Yeah, the great thing is that anyone can join the Flightradar 24 network. We have, like I said before, we have two kind of different tracks, and the first track is we will send you a full receiver kit if you are in a good position to provide some really good data, or you're in a position where we don't yet have enough coverage. And so what that kit includes is the actual radio antenna, a GPS antenna, and then the physical receiver box, the computer. And that's just plug and play into power and internet. You mount the antenna where, outside on a mast or your roof or something like that, where it has a view of the sky, and then you're all set. The second one is anybody can do this. You don't have to be in a great position. You don't necessarily have to have a 360-degree view of the sky. If you're just interested in radio signals or aircraft tracking or anything like that, you can get a Raspberry Pi, head to our website, and then click on Add Coverage. And we walk through all of the steps that you need to go from I bought a Raspberry Pi to I'm now feeding data into the Flightradar 24 network, and both of those options include a free business subscription. So as a thank you for providing data from your area, you get a business subscription, which includes lots of our best features, and it's the highest subscription we offer to individuals. So you get 2 years of historical data, different charting options, so aeronautical charts and things like that, weather features, and we're adding new features all the time.
Ian, it's been really, really interesting hearing about your work and about the network and about the future possibilities of it. Before we say goodbye, where can we go to follow along and learn more about what you're up to?
Sure. So the best way to follow along with the aircraft is just flightradar24.com, and then you can find us as Flightradar 24 on a variety of social media platforms, Twitter, Facebook, Instagram, VK, LinkedIn, wherever you choose to be social, you can find us there.
Excellent. Hey, thank you so much for your time. Really appreciate it.
I appreciate you having me on. This was a lot of fun. Thank you so much.
And that's it for another episode of the Mapscaping podcast. My name is Daniel, and I really want to thank you for listening to these episodes. It's much appreciated. If you want to reach out to me for whatever reason, you can find me on social media at Mapscaping on Facebook and Twitter. And also, if you have a friend that you think might enjoy these podcasts, or podcast episodes, I should say, please share it with them. I'd really appreciate it. Thanks again, and we'll talk again soon. Bye.